Greetings, people of Earth and worlds beyond. This is the Phoenix King, and you're probably wondering why I'm an old man. Well, that would be because it has been literally decades since the last countdown, to the point where it has actually physically made me older. How long it has been. Literally. Decades. As so many of you have been so kind to point out. Nah, but seriously, you're all great.
Here's an idea. Let's play a game about lawyers. Yeah, forget the ninjas, soldiers, heroes, and assassins. Let's just step into a courtroom for a little while. I'm sure that will be most delightful. Well, Capcom, I don't know how, but you pulled it off spectacularly. The Ace Attorney series has recently rocketed onto my list of favorites. While they may play out more like interactive novels than typical video games, this series features some of the best writing and storytelling I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. Despite each game having an overarching narrative, the focus is kept primarily on the 4 to 5 chapters in the game called Turnabouts. Each one follows the protagonists as they try to find out the truth behind a certain crime through investigating, court battling, interrogating, and 9 times out of 10 pure bluffing. Most of these clock in with at least a few hours of gameplay devoted to them, and while formulaic in theory, each of them are very memorable for various reasons. For the sake of this countdown, I'll be focusing primarily on the story and writing. Also, while not as important in my eyes, their influence on the rest of the narrative will also be a factor. Lastly, a word of warning. Keep in mind that I will be discussing large portions of these very story-driven games, so this is one video where the spoiler alert is actually really important. Just be aware of what you're getting into should you so desire. Well, if there are no further objections, it's time to lay down my verdict. What better way to start off this countdown than with the very first turnabout of Apollo Justice? Yeah, I won't deny that I'm not a big fan of most of the game's first turnabouts, as they're intentionally simple and tend to function as little more than a tutorial, but Turnabout Trump manages to show players the ropes while also being a great standalone story. Apollo Justice was the first game in the series to not feature Phoenix Wright as its main protagonist. So as you would expect, there was plenty of skepticism and curiosity for fans of the series going into it. For many, this game had something to prove, and its first Turnabout did a heck of a job with it. Turnabout Trump focuses on the murder of Shady Smith after apparently beating the defendant in a game of poker. Who is that defendant? Well, Phoenix Wright! Yup, they just dropped that bomb. Immediately upon seeing Phoenix in the defendant's chair, it became clear that Capcom were intent on taking this game just as seriously as the others despite the change in protagonists, and we're not even 10 minutes in yet. From there, the rest of the case is a relatively simple affair, but one that's made much more interesting by the fact that, unlike most first turnabouts, the killer's identity is not made known to the audience right away. The suspicion flies all over the place, from Phoenix to the waitress Olga Orley to back to Phoenix and to Trucy and back. Phoenix himself isn't helping the matter, as he even admits that he's told little of the truth while on the stand. Eventually, the true guilty party became someone who wasn't even on the cards yet, Apollo's own mentor, Christoph Gavin, and that Phoenix was intentionally being deceitful in order to bring the court to that conclusion. Yeah, the discovery was a little abrupt, but it's forgivable for the sake of getting the plot rolling. We also get dropped hints about Phoenix's disbarment, which would become a major plot thread throughout the whole game. I like this turnabout for 2 main reasons. The first is for being the most interesting of all the first turnabouts in the series, and the second is for its audacity. This game was not afraid of giving the fan-favorite Phoenix Wright a few less than admirable traits, even giving Apollo a piece of falsified evidence. It was a bit jarring at first, but it was handled very well to keep Phoenix likable despite this. It had great setup, some unique qualities as a tutorial, and it was a great way to prove to the fans that this game meant business. Throughout the franchise's history, there have been more than a few cases dealing with a flying criminal. I'm not sure why there have been so many of them, but they're usually pretty interesting regardless, and each time they come up with a different explanation for something so obviously impossible to accomplish. If you ask me though, their best attempt at this style was also their very first, Turnabout Big Top. I say this because, in other cases dealing with the idea, the flight isn't given the right amount of attention, I think. It's usually just written off by the characters as hogwash until it suddenly becomes important again. However, from the beginning of this case, the flight is the central focus of your client's arrest and your means of proving his innocence. Your client in this case is Maximilian Galactica, a stage magician currently performing with the Very Big Circus. He is under arrest for the murder of the ringmaster because, among other things, eyewitnesses saw the culprit fly away from the murder scene, and Galactica's most famous magic trick is him flying around the stadium. So the focus of this case is not on how the flight could be possible, but rather on how it couldn't have been Galactica, which I think is a much more straightforward and interesting means of dealing with this idea. Also, with the setting of the circus, this turnabout introduces us to a swarm of crazy, memorable side characters, all of whom have some level of duality. You have your client Galactica, who turns out was raised as a country bumpkin named Billy Bob Johns. You have Mo the Clown, who's actually a huge pessimist. You have Regina Berry, who, despite being the most innocent creature on the face of the planet, is somehow the animal tamer. You have a ventriloquist whose puppet has more of a life than he does. And finally you have the gentle, soft-spoken Acro, recently crippled by a training accident, who has a decidedly less gentle backstory. I had a blast with these characters. All of them play off each other and the somewhat normal main characters hysterically. Now, while doing research for this video, I found out that quite a lot of people actually hate this case. I was confused by this at first, but from what I can tell, this reaction stems from two main sources, the characters and the leaps in logic. Looking back, I guess I can see how they might bother some people. The characters, especially the puppet, definitely have some jerky moments, like when Mo takes the witness stand and spends half the time telling his lame jokes, or when Galactica acts like nothing important is going on despite him being tried for a murder. However, through it all, I still got the impression that they all meant well. Like when Mo brings Regina to the second day of the trial. Many could see that as pretty cruel, seeing how she was the victim's daughter, but he tells Phoenix Wright after the trial's end that he just wanted her to become a little more aware of the world around her. She managed to come to terms with her father's death, yet still kept up that bubbly personality, and never once blamed Mo for showing that to her. I don't know, maybe it's because I've known people who act like these guys in real life, but I found charming what others may have found annoying. As for the logic leaps, I can't really say much about those. An unfortunate problem that this series will always have is that the pieces aren't going to come together for every player every time. I've had similar experiences on other turnabouts throughout the series, so I won't deny that that can have a negative effect on my opinion of them. Heck, even Phoenix seems like he's just making up his argument as he goes in this case, so if you had trouble with it, I understand your frustration. Personally, I never had a problem with it. And even if I did, I likely would have been too sucked up by the colorful scenery, wacky characters, funny dialogue, and clever concept to care. To each their own, but this one's staying in my list of favorites. Let's talk about Miles Edgeworth Investigations. I'm not a big fan of this game. It's a bit of a shame because I like the concept, and the new gameplay elements were pretty fun, if a little unforgiving at times. However, I could not get behind this game's story. Most of the game centers around the search for two criminals, the great thief Yatagarasu and the head of an international smuggling ring, and the two end up converging in the game's final turnabout. It's a decent setup, but the whole plot felt a little dry and, in all honesty, pretty forgettable. So it only makes sense that my favorite case from this game would be the one almost completely disconnected from that overarching plot. Enter the kidnapped Turnabout. At the end of the previous case, Edgeworth got called out of the blue by an old friend, Ernest Amano. His son Lance has been kidnapped and is being held for ransom. Edgeworth himself ends up delivering the money at a theme park, only to then become another hostage. With the criminals unable to escape the park due to a police perimeter, it's up to Edgeworth to find out who they are. In retrospect, this is in the same sort of vein as the rest of the game, trying to pin a face to a mysterious criminal. However, I feel it works so much better in this case because of its location. There's not as much guesswork going on since we know that they have to be somewhere in the park. This makes the reveal slightly more predictable, sure, but it allows the case to focus more on the what than on the who. The inner workings of how this crime took place are really interesting, and it makes great use of the investigation gameplay. And all the while, there's a real sense of urgency created by Agent Lang breathing down your neck the whole way through. Ah yes, this turnabout also introduced Shilong Lang, an Interpol agent same as Francisco on Karma, and his assistant Sheena. He brings a ton of energy to this chapter that much of the rest of the game seems to lack. Anytime you manage to get close to some new information, he forces you to leave the area, taking you back to square one. While this can be a little bit jolting, there's definitely a satisfaction in discovering new information right under his nose. Oh, you're gonna kick me out? Fine by me. Oh, I solved the case while you were picking up my leftovers. Sorry, not sorry. Turnabout Succession from Apollo Justice very nearly ticked me off the first time I played it. After all, it commits quite a few no-nos of the franchise, like showing the identity of the killer within the first minute, the weird time-hopping thing that makes less sense the more you think about it, Phoenix's cryptic drivel, and having the villain of the game turn out to be the villain of the game. Way to keep me on my toes there, Mr. Sir. However, this turnabout did manage to win my favor back with several glorious moments of awesome. This is largely due to the fact that the entire turnabout is split up into 4 parts, each of which is very good on its own merits. The basic gist is that Drew Measham was killed with poison, and the defendant is his daughter Vera. While he claims to be an artist, it turns out that Vera actually assisted Drew in making forgeries. One of those forgeries was for a diary page that was used as evidence in a court case a while back. However, before Vera can reveal who the client was, she falls unconscious, having been tainted by the same poison used to kill her father. We then flash back to Phoenix's final case from several years ago, where the defendant was a magician named Zach Gramar. Phoenix presented the false diary page in court, albeit unknowingly, resulting in him being disbarred and his client being forced into hiding. Phoenix then jumps back and forth between the past and the present, piecing together clues from all his investigations over the years to finally discover the true culprit behind both poisonings and the client for the forged diary page. In the 4th and final part, Apollo wields this information expertly to take down his mentor once and for all. Believe me, there's a ton more going on in the story of this case, and it's really complex and interesting, but I'd rather not be here all day explaining it in its entirety. Instead, I'll just share with you a few of the little moments that really blew me away. First off, the scene where Phoenix presents the false diary page is one of the most uncomfortable moments I've ever had while playing a game. Knowing full well what would happen when that evidence was presented, and yet still having to press the button to do it was really powerful, even heartbreaking. Also, during the time hopping, Phoenix returns to the scene of meeting with Shady Smith from Turnabout Trump and they're the same guy! Shady is Zack, and Zack is Shady! And it was right in front of us all along! Oh, shipyard! Finally, the particular method used to take down Gavin was especially satisfying. Originally, it seems like he can't be officially indicted of the crime, because the only definitive evidence against him was obtained illegally. However, the ultimate turning of the tables occurs when everyone reveals to Kristoff that this trial would be decided by a jury instead of just the judge. This whole trial had actually been set up to try out a new justice system that allowed the wisdom of the common onlooker to have a say in the verdict. And who had set up this system and assigned the trial run for this specific case? None other than Phoenix Wright himself, of course, proving that he was always one step ahead of Kristoff in perhaps the most gratifying way possible. This case is full of a lot of little moments that really make it stand out as a whole, even overshadowing a few of its less favorable aspects. It's clever, it's intriguing, and it's one case that certainly succeeded. There's no doubt that Ace Attorney games are really great at creating drama, but right now I feel the need to address the opposite end of the spectrum. Because while drama is all fine and good and often make for the most memorable moments in the franchise, these games are just as good at creating comedy when they feel like it. And the two best turnabouts for comedy, in my opinion, are The Fire Witch and Turnabout Reclaimed. Yeah, I put these two in a tie. Exactly how long has it been since you've seen one of those in a countdown? It may be a bit of a cop-out to some, but I think separating the two would be really redundant, since a lot of what I have to say about one also applies to the other. So let's just move on before I get a flood of angry comments saying how indecisive I am. The Fire Witch is the first witch trial in Versus Professor Layton. You're defending the girl who both you and Layton met back in London from reportedly using a fire spell to burn 2 thieves to death. The case on the whole is relatively simple, as it also functions as a semi-tutorial for the new mechanics introduced for witch trials, such as interrogating multiple witnesses at once and adapting to forms of proof and evidence from a much earlier age than Wright is used to. The whole case is really witty and filled to the brim with jokes. The witness Emir, who shows up for the second section of the trial, is a barrel of laughs as well, with his drunken slurs and misconceptions. The whole thing is just really clever. Yeah, I bet you never thought you'd see a Thundercats reference in an Ace Attorney game, did ya? On the other hand, Turnabout Reclaimed isn't quite as witty as the Fire Witch, but makes up for it in spades by the sheer lunacy of the whole situation. In this DLC case for Dual Destinies, you are defending a killer. Whale. I'm not even kidding. The defendant is Orla the Orca, the star of a pirate-themed trick show at non-copyrighted SeaWorld. She's being accused of killing her owner and is going to be euthanized. Of course, Phoenix took the job before fully realizing this, but that's just the beginning of the hilarity. As you start to investigate the aquarium in question, you come across a penguin that consistently friend-zones Athena, Marlon Rhymes, an employee working to fund a rapping career, Sasha Buckler the trainer, Dr. Herman Crab, who literally has a bird's nest on his head, and the now 17-year-old Pearl Fay, who in all that time hasn't lost a single ounce of adorable. Because it's a DLC case, Capcom knew that they didn't really have to make this one particularly story-heavy, and decided to just have as much of a ball with it as possible. And with little exchanges like this, they clearly succeeded. Ha! Even as the case progresses, the ridiculous meter gets blown skyward, to the point where Phoenix ends up cross-examining Orla. Granted, this isn't the first or last time Phoenix has cross-examined an animal in the courtroom, but every other time it was a parrot who could still replicate human speech or sounds. This is literally just Phoenix trying to make a case out of fweet fweet fweet. And it is glorious. Sure, there's a decent case underneath it all with some legitimately heartwarming moments as well, but that kinda takes a back seat when you're defending a singing mustachioed whale against a rapping pirate who hooks out on sardines! I can't do it anymore! If you ever need a lighthearted break from the typical Ace Attorney fare, boot these two up and let the laughter flow. Now, for as underwhelming as I found the first Miles Edgeworth Investigations game, I found its sequel, Prosecutor's Path, equally interesting and dynamic. Unfortunately, it was only officially released in Japan, but there is a fan-made English translation, so there's always that. Seriously though, for consistent quality, this is among the best games in the franchise. It streamlined the investigation mechanics, had a much more interesting storyline behind it in my opinion, and offered a metric crap ton of development for Edgeworth's character. The whole chess motif was a little weird, but I can roll with it. And the first representative of this game on my list is the imprisoned Turnabout. Say, have you ever wondered what happens to the people that Edgeworth and all the rest convict? Well, we find out all about it here, as Horace Knightley gets murdered inside a prison workroom, despite having not yet received his sentence. That's already strange enough, but then as the crew start to investigate the place for clues, the questions only keep popping up. For example, while the killing blow was clearly a stab to the neck, there's no sign of the actual murder weapon, and this being a highly secure prison, they're unlikely to find one just lying around. Not only that, but Ciaran Dogan decides to show up, a blind assassin that Edgeworth apparently had a large part in capturing. He's about as creepy as you'd expect him to be, and adds a whole layer of uneasiness to this already perplexing mystery. Then, as if we didn't have enough to deal with, Judge Justine Courtney, yes that's actually her name, decides to come in, kick Edgeworth off the investigation, and threaten to take his prosecutor's badge. So now, we've got a murder inside a prison, established alibis for everyone inside, a victim who shouldn't have even been there, and you're not supposed to be here yourself. Well, tickle me pink because the genius in that setup burns a fiery magenta. One of the things I really liked about Prosecutor's Path as a whole was its consistent ability to make you rethink what is initially obvious, and this case is a prime example of that ability. It quickly turns into a web of secrets that Edgeworth has to work through, discovering all manner of closet-residing skeletons along the way. No one is innocent. It's quite remarkable just how much is thrown on the table here for only the second turnabout in the game. I mean, never mind the actual murder case happening here, the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes of this prison is where the real intrigue of this case lies. It goes to some pretty dark places, even for the Ace Attorney franchise. I found the ending to be a little predictable, sure, but the route it took to reach that conclusion still kept me invested the whole way through. It was intense, captivating, and set one hell of a bar for the rest of the game to try and beat. And also, it brought Regina Barry and Frank Sawit back. So that's like 53 extra points of awesome right there. When standalone games turn into long-lasting franchises, it's a typical rule of thumb that the first game rarely ends up being the best. And while Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney isn't the worst example I can think of, it is still sadly no exception to that rule. While it did a good job establishing the formula and story structure for the rest of the franchise, and setting the foundation that the other games will capitalize on its own it's pretty underwhelming, at least when compared to the later entries. I found the turnabouts in this game short, clunky, and not all that interesting to be honest. However, when it came time to port the first 3 games in the series from the GBA to the DS for international release, some brilliant guy down at Capcom decided to use some of that extra space on the DS cartridge to add an entire new case to the lineup. And it was amazing. Rise from the Ashes may not be connected to the overarching story of the game it accompanies, but that's hardly a problem when you've got something this good to look forward to. The defendant is Chief Prosecutor Lana Skye, which is already brutal enough, but she is also confessing to the murder despite her sister insisting that she's lying. Lana as a story element is really interesting. Your other clients throughout most of the games act desperate and emotional, like many would realistically do if they are being framed for a crime they didn't commit. Throughout the whole ordeal though, Lana plays it all off with a deadpan expression, completely aloof and alienating the few people trying to help her. It gives you the feeling that something really tricky is going on behind the scenes. That feeling only grows stronger as once you start investigating, everything seems a little more off than usual. The man in charge of the crime scene is Jake Marshall, who you find out later is actually not a detective, just a patrolman specifically called in from another part of the city. The murder weapon and the car the body was found in both actually belong to Edgeworth. All the people involved with the current case also relate back to another case 2 years prior that was resolved on very uncertain terms. Even the chief of police comes in with the ultimate curveball of the victim having been found murdered inside the police station at the same time Lana supposedly kills him at the prosecutor's office. While the other cases in the game were pretty straightforward, this one throws everything it has at you and trusts you to keep up. I suppose that could be a little daunting for some, but it also can be thrilling to just get pulled along for this crazy ride, trying to make sense of it along the way. However, at no point does it ever feel rushed. This Turnabout covers the most chapters of the whole series, a whopping total of 10 between the investigations and the trials, and it fills every second with well-paced and exciting content. The beginning is intense, with all these facts being launched at you and having to cling to that last bit of hope. The middle is gripping as you observe the tragedy of the entire situation unfold. The pieces slowly fall into place, revealing the demons that lie in wait beneath the surface. The ending is every synonym of satisfying, taking the rules and laws the true killer hid behind for so long and rebounding them right back, proving Phoenix to be the kind of lawyer he'd sought to be since childhood. I don't know about you, but that sounds like the kind of story I'd like to play through again, even if it is long. Long, 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 longer than long can even describe. It's really long. Amnesia. As a physical condition, it can be difficult to recover from and potentially cause a change in the victim's personality or self-identity. Also, may or may not boost special defense. As a plot device though, it's usually a catalyst for marathon groaning. While not always done badly, amnesia is often used as an excuse not to give the audience critical information until a certain point in the story. Yes, it adds a sense of mystery to the events surrounding the amnesia, but without a strong payoff, it just ends up confusing and frustrating the audience. Ace Attorney did not fall into that trap, however, as it managed to do an amnesia plotline extremely well, in a game that was only released in Japan. So yeah, the Forgotten Turnabout is pretty sweet. At this point in the overall story, Judge Courtney has arranged a hearing for Edgeworth with the powers that be to determine whether or not he'll be allowed to continue prosecuting. On the day that this meeting is supposed to occur, however, two tragedies turn up at almost the same time. First, one of the members of the council has been found murdered. Kinda sucky. But then, a nurse brings a bandaged Kay Faraday to Edgeworth, telling him that she got into an accident and has lost most of her memory. Reason number one why this plotline works. Both the audience and the in-game characters know Kay's identity. She's been assisting Edgeworth throughout the whole game, so there's no frustrating lack of information on that front. Reason number two why this plotline works. The amnesia is a motivation, not a hindrance. The characters all actively try to bring her memories back, rather than them being left by the wayside for the sake of plot convenience. They're constantly asking her if she can remember anything new, regardless of whether or not it makes sense. When the characters are invested, the audience will also be. Anyway, when they go to retrace Kay's steps, our heroes stumble upon the murder scene, after which Kay is almost immediately indicted due to a letter found with the victim bearing her name. Reason number three why this plotline works. The lost memories are important to the current situation. She's being accused of a murder that she can't even remember if she committed or not. That's about as high of stakes as you could put into recovering those memories. And finally, reason number four why this plotline works. When the memories finally are restored, they are used to confirm what has already been supposed. With many amnesia stories, the return of the memories serves as a sort of deus ex machina. Oh, I remember now that I had this ability that can solve our problem instantly. Boy, it sure was convenient for the bad guy that I forgot I could do that, but then I guess we wouldn't have had this wacky adventure together. With this, however, whenever Kay does remember something new, it's usually something that proves a theory Edgeworth already proposed. He still works out the details for himself, keeping in line with the rest of the game, and this makes sure that the player doesn't feel like divine intervention solved the case for them. And yes, there's a brilliant case here as well, with tons of great character development and dialogues, a whole bunch of twists and backhand deals behind the main event, but I'm sorry, the amnesia plot steals the show. Maybe it's because it's going up against a sea of inferior interpretations, but this one aspect of the Turnabout is extremely impressive. Brava, Kay Faraday. Brava.